In the early 1800s, a group of aristocrats sat next to a body of water enjoying nature when an ugly old hermit seemingly came out of nowhere. They described him as missing several teeth and wearing a costume from ancient Rome. The group laughed as he pointed and he announced the arrival of the Emperor. But when they turned to look, they stopped laughing because the Emperor, he was there. Water really is an amazing substance. According to Merriam-Webster, it descends from the clouds, forms streams, lakes, and seas, and is the major constituent in all living matter. In pure form, it is odorless and tasteless. It's been called the universal solvent. It makes up between 50 to 60% of the human body and nearly 80% of the human brain. On June 30th, 1988, the physician and immunologist Jacques Bonviniste published a study about an experiment showing that water could remember. In the experiment, he added a substance to pure water, and then he diluted the water to the point where no molecule of the original substance remained. And even though the substance wasn't in the water any longer, the water clearly showed characteristics of having that substance still in it. The experiment was mind-boggling, and although later many scientists just dismissed the experiment as being a fluke, not everyone did. In December of 2010, Science magazine published an interview with Nobel Prize-winning virologist Luc Montagnier. He's the scientist who led the team that discovered the HIV virus, and he's spent a lifetime studying how substances interact in liquids. In the interview, he stated that he believed that there was something to Bonviniste's studies, and that water most definitely does have a memory.
There is a kind of fear around this topic in Europe. I am told that some people have reproduced Beneviste's results, but they are afraid to publish them because of the intellectual terror from people who don't understand it.
Montagnier says that Benveniste is a modern-day Galileo. The author, Troy Taylor, has been called a historian of the supernatural, and he's authored almost 90 books on the unexplained. He's written about water's apparent ability to remember, and he suggests that perhaps this mysterious property just might be what's behind some yet-to-be-explained events.
This characteristic of water may be the cause of much paranormal activity. Troy Taylor talks about a gymnasium built over an underground lake where the roar of the crowd is still heard long after the game's concluded. So too, an abandoned hospital where a PA system can still be heard calling doctors to their duties long after the patients have left. Taylor speculates that water trapped in wood or bricks may have recorded the sounds, and when the natural environment is correct, it plays back those recordings.
Robin Mackey thinks that this theory might help to explain what's behind some residual hauntings. But could there be something more here? Could something like this also help to explain what's behind some of the timeslip phenomena? Believe it or not, several reports of timeslips have occurred around large amounts of water. The really famous account of Sir Victor Goddard traveling 4 years into the future began in a torrential downpour. In this video, we're going to consider the possibility that water just might play a role in some of the timeslip reports, and we'll do this by examining 5 separate accounts. The first 2 took place on the beach next to the ocean, and the last 3, which were all connected to the ancient Roman Empire, were centered around a large body of water known as Wroxham Broad in Norfolk, England. And then stay with us for our fact or fiction section. There, I'm going to take just a minute and give my thoughts on this theory. And then Amy is going to come on and she's going to talk about water's strange connection with consciousness. So, this report begins on the island of Sylt in 1923. Our first report is about two families who were on holiday visiting the German island of Sylt. The Huttons and the Scholhoffs didn't know each other. Mr. and Mrs. Hutton and their 3 children rented a house in the seaside town of Westerland. Not long after they settled in, they met Captain Scholhoff and his wife and their 2 daughters. The families hit it off right away, and they quickly became holiday friends. Then, on August 2nd, 1923, Mr. Hutton had to leave vacation early and head back to Berlin for work. Both families saw him to the train station and wished him farewell. Once he departed, they thought that they would spend a little time sightseeing. Unfortunately, they lost track of time and they missed the last ride back to their vacation homes. So they were forced to return on foot, which took them 4 miles along the beach. Everyone was enjoying the walk. The waves were calm and the weather was nice. But about halfway into their journey, they came across a wide bay, and just as they did, the wind began to pick up, and suddenly the waves became violent. Before anyone could really contemplate this strange change in weather, their attention was drawn to a small fishing boat that was in danger of being swamped by the huge waves. They then noticed a group of men on the beach, dressed very oddly, who were attempting to use a small cannon and fire a lifeline out to the boat. They heard the cannon fire, and they watched the rope go through the air, but the wind and the waves were just too violent, and the men on the fishing boat weren't able to grab the line. After a few minutes, the men on the shore re-prepared the cannon and tried again, but just like before, the line missed, and it fell into the water. About that time, Captain Scholhoff ran up to the men on the shore who were just about to launch a lifeboat, and he shouted over the wind, stating that he was a naval man and he would like to offer his help. Oddly, the man in charge said no thank you, and with that, he got into the boat and then rowed away from the shore. The other men on the beach were preparing to launch another lifeline, but just before they did, the fishing boat suddenly capsized, and it disappeared below the waves. So the rest of the rescuers jumped into a second lifeboat, and they raced out into the water. At about the time that they caught up to the first, a huge wave crashed against the boats and sank them both. Well, the family gasped, and Mrs. Hutton screamed, and just as the echo of her scream dissipated, the wind died down, and then the bay became calm. Well, both families just kept staring at the area of water where the lifeboats had sank, waiting to see if any of the men would surface. But they didn't. After a minute, Captain Scholhoff looked back toward the shore, and that's when he saw a large stone cross standing up out of the sand. The families made their way over to the cross, and they found that it was a monument with an inscription.
To the eternal memory and the glory of our beloved husbands and brothers, our fathers and sons, who perished in the cruel and merciless sea while bravely trying to rescue their comrades when their fishing vessel foundered on the evening of August 2nd, 1872. May God have mercy on the souls of these 18 fishermen and the would-be rescuers, and may they have eternal peace.
Standing at the monument, the families realized that they had somehow just witnessed the reenactment of an event that had occurred at that exact same place and on that exact same day, 51 years into the past. When they reached the next village, they made inquiries about the tragedy, and they were introduced to the local priest, who, much to their surprise, told them that others have also witnessed this strange ghostly event, and that it always happens on the same day, August 2nd, and at the same time. Many people believe that this is more of a haunting than it is a time slip, and maybe they're right. Or perhaps, maybe, some time slips have been mistaken for hauntings. In any case, I think it's important to point out that at no time did any member of these two families feel threatened by this strange event. But the same thing can't be said about the people in our next story. Just across the North Sea from the island of Sylt is the United Kingdom country of Scotland. In 1979, a high-powered couple named John and Stella Jeffries took 6 months off from their home in London, and they rented a huge cottage on the western shore. John was an aspiring author who had just written his first bestseller, and the couple had come to this secluded area so he could work on his next book. Oddly, after they moved in, it seemed as if people deliberately avoided their home. It began with their housekeeper. She did excellent work, but she made it very clear that she would never come to their house after dark. Once Stella got to know a few of the people in town, she sent out invitations for a dinner party, but each person had some strange excuse not to come. Then one day, while she was out shopping, she overheard a conversation that the bay where her cottage was located was haunted. Now, Stella had a degree in anthropology, and she was a committed rationalist, so she dismissed the idea. John, however, was less certain. He was much more open-minded to possibilities. Well, the months rolled by, and John got to work on his book. Stella actually got involved with writing articles on the local plant life. Then, on September 2nd, a massive storm rolled in, and the couple prepared to stay indoors for the next couple of days. John had just gotten comfortable with a crossword puzzle in the sitting room when he heard a couple of gunshots coming from out in the cove. So he immediately jumped up, put on his shoes, grabbed his coat, and went outside. When he did, he saw a huge sailing boat out in the bay. Well, this was odd, so we looked closer, and a group of men were lowering a smaller boat into the water, and they were planning on coming ashore. It was then that he noticed the weather. The storm had stopped, and the sun was now shining brightly on the deck, and John couldn't make any sense of it. Just moments earlier, the rain was coming down in buckets. John looked around, and he noticed something even stranger. The clear skies seemed to be centered above his cottage and the sailing ship. Out in the distance, in what looked like to be a perfect circle, he could see that the rain was still falling. And that's the moment that things began to feel surreal for John. He called for Stella, and she came outside, and it was she that noticed the wind was blowing on them and the ship in the opposite direction of the movement of the clouds and the trees that were across the cove just outside of this mysterious circle. It was also Stella who noticed that the ship looked a lot like a Spanish battleship from hundreds of years ago. So she went back inside and she got some binoculars. When she returned, she looked closer and she saw that there were battle marks on the ship. And it was about this time that that boat that they put into the water earlier had reached the shore. It beached just about 50 meters from the cottage, and it was at that moment that they both became very afraid. The men on the boat started unloading large barrels, and Stella could see through the binoculars that they were all wearing clothing from another century. She said that they looked tired, dispirited, and many of them were suffering from wounds. The officer in charge looked like he was barely in his 20s, and he was holding a pistol. A few seconds later, he noticed John and Stella, and they were sure that he was going to shoot. Everything about the moment seemed so real that neither one of them doubted that the bullet most certainly would be real as well. The man shouted something and pointed to his barrels, and John had the presence of mind to point up to the well in the garden. And at that, the officer put the gun away, and then the whole party rushed the barrels up the slope toward that well. The couple watched as they drank their fill from the bucket and then worked to fill the barrels. One by one, they rolled the filled barrels back down to the boat and stowed them until the watering was complete. John later said that it was at that moment that he was most afraid. He was positive that after getting what they needed, those men were going to shoot them, but they didn't. Instead, the young captain doffed his hat in salutation, climbed inside the boat, and then pushed away from the shore. Shortly after that, the men got back to that sailing ship, loaded it up, and then sailed away from the cove. And as the boat was making its way into the distance, with no warning whatsoever, it just vanished, and John and Stella found themselves getting drenched in a sudden downpour. They looked around, and it was as if the rain had never stopped. The last two accounts took place near the ocean, and in separate locations. But the next 3 happened more inland, over a span of about 200 years, and basically in the same place. It was a beautiful Tuesday morning, July 21st, 1829, when the wealthy Englishman, Lord Percival Durand, took some friends of his on his yacht for a trip down the Bure River. They sailed on for a while and then anchored and went ashore. When they walked across the grass to the majestic, large expanse of water known as Wroxham Broad, they found a spot beneath a large tree to sit and enjoy the view. While they were sharing a conversation and enjoying each other's company, a strange hermit, dressed in an ancient Roman costume, suddenly came out of the trees and approached the group.
He was an uncanny-looking person, whom one might reasonably suppose to live in a hole in the ground. A forbidding-looking person indeed. His mouth was very large, and his lower jaw had dropped somewhat, revealing ragged, discolored teeth, several of which were missing. No one saw him arrive, and no one saw exactly what eventually became of him when he left us.
The hermit sternly demanded to know what they were doing there, and he told the group that they were trespassing. When Durand asked him what exactly he meant by that, the hermit told him that this land belonged to Caesar. Well, at this, the group could barely hold in their laughter, and they asked him exactly which Caesar that he was talking about. The reply came back, Marcus Aurelius Carausius, the Emperor of Britain. Well, this was too much. With his strange costume and his hermit-like appearance, the group just knew they were in the presence of a crazy man. Still, his appearance was entertaining, and one of them asked him his name, to which he said that he was Flavius Mantis, the keeper of the rolls.
Okay, Flavius, but tell me, why are you here today? The Roman Empire relinquished these islands 1,500 years ago.
You are right, and you are wrong. The 20th Legion of Auxiliaries of the Belgae left here, as you say, but the Roman Empire in the West never relinquished these lands. The Empire continues here today as of old, and I am still the keeper of the rolls. And it is our noble Emperor's birthday.
And with that, the hermit turned and he gestured grandly toward Wroxham Broad, and he added that there would soon be a great festival in the stadium. And then he asked if they could see Carausius's banner floating over the royal box. Well, this absurd question removed any doubt from the group that this guy was absolutely crazy. But of course, they couldn't help but turn their heads and look in the direction that he was pointing. And when they did, what they saw made them question their own sanity.
The waters of the Broad rolled back, and the entire area transformed into the most elaborate Roman amphitheater with seats all around. Thousands of silken banners were fluttering in the breeze. The arena was majestic and beautiful. There were thousands of people dressed in Roman costumes, and several chariots with prancing white horses. We rubbed our eyes and pinched ourselves to try and convince ourselves that we were not dreaming, but it was all genuine enough.
Then the hermit spoke again, and as he did, the group watched as he somehow transformed from that old hermit into a young Roman officer.
Today, our great emperor arrives by road from Branadunum on his return with his fleet from Gesoriacum. And here he comes!
The Englishmen could not believe their eyes, nor their ears, as loud sounds of hurrahs and trumpets rose up from the amphitheater.
A mighty roar of welcome went up, as a large golden chariot drawn by 10 white horses came into view. Around the chariot were 12 full-grown lions, led with golden chains by Roman soldiers carrying long spears.
See, There is the greatest man this country has ever known. There, standing before you, is the great General Marcus Aurelius Valerius Carausius.
The group watched for a while, completely dumbstruck, and then after a bit, it all began to dissolve.
Slowly, the entire apparition faded, and in a moment the span of water resumed its normal appearance, and the Roman officer changed back to the old man, and then wandered away into the trees.
One of the interesting things about this account was the fact that the people who witnessed it didn't come back trying to convince the world that they had experienced something otherworldly that day. Instead, they kept quiet, as opposed to having everyone think that they were crazy. As a matter of fact, the only reason that the world knows about this account is because of a letter that was found written by Lord Durand to his father. The letter is quite detailed, and it's obvious that it's not a joke. But perhaps the most interesting thing about this case was the fact that this wasn't the first time that someone had experienced seeing ancient Rome come to life in this area. Over 100 years before Lord Durand took his friends down the Bure River, on April 16, 1709, the Gentleman's Gazette shared the account of Reverend Thomas Penston. He claimed that he and some of his friends were having a picnic on the banks of a beautiful lake about 10 miles from the ancient city of Norwich when they were suddenly ordered away by, as he put it, a very undesirable-looking person whose appearance and clothing insulted the very refinements of good natural breeding. Flavius Mantis, perhaps? The Reverend didn't feel safe at the appearance of this odd-looking hermit, so he began to gather his things to leave. But in the process, they saw a magnificent procession making its way toward them, and before they could pick everything up, they had to quickly stand aside. The parade was long and bizarre, containing hundreds of men and what appeared to be a Roman general riding on a golden chariot. The chariot was being pulled by 10 white stallions, and there were about a dozen Roman soldiers leading huge lions on chains. There was a band of trumpeters and drummers loudly announcing the parade's presence as it went by.
They passed quite close to us, but no one apparently saw us. There must have been 700 or 800 horsemen in this long procession of archers, pikemen, and ballistic machines. Whether they went or from whence they came, I know not, yet they vanished at the lakeside. The noise of their passing was very loud and unmistakable.
100 years even further into the past, in 1603, a man named Benjamin Curtis described how he and 2 others not only saw Marcus Aurelius Carausius, but he said that the 3 of them somehow transformed into Roman officers. He said that they were swimming across the lake when suddenly they felt their feet touch the bottom. Now at that time, that part of the lake should have been at least 12 to 15 feet deep. They stopped and puzzled. And then the strangest thing happened. The water got shallower and shallower until it was completely gone, and they found themselves standing on dry ground, dressed as Roman officers. Benjamin later said that the oddest part about the entire experience was that for some reason, they weren't surprised. It was as if they felt that they belonged there. As a matter of fact, during the time that they were there experiencing this, they almost forgot that they were actually from the 1600s, and a moment earlier had been swimming. Like the descriptions that we gave in the last 2 segments, they also described seeing, and now being a part of, a magnificent Roman procession. And this experience went on for a while, and then like with Lord Durand's party, this remarkable, noisy scene faded and then disappeared, as did the trio's newly acquired Roman costumes, and they once again found themselves splashing in the cold lake back in their own century. So, were these examples of time slips? Maybe hauntings? Or perhaps some other yet-to-be-explained scientific phenomenon? Of course, most of the world would say that these are nothing more than fabrications, or maybe something that was misunderstood and then through the years exaggerated. But they all did take place near large bodies of water. Could there be any truth to the idea that water actually can hold a memory? As most of the world says no to this, don't forget that a Nobel Prize winning virologist claimed otherwise. Assuming for just a minute that these events actually did happen, there are some similarities besides just them all being connected with water. All 5 of these accounts seem to have been reoccurring events. Over the years, several people have claimed that they saw a group of men desperately trying to save that fishing boat off of the coast of Sylt. And all of those accounts are always reported on the same day, August 2nd. That small stretch of beach in Scotland, where that Spanish battleship appeared, had enough strange events happen in that area for it to develop a reputation for being haunted. And the world has written accounts dating back over 200 years for the final 3 segments of our report. And these last 3 accounts are unmistakably the same Roman event. Perhaps all of these are just stories, or perhaps there's something more. Amy discovered that there just might be a connection between water and consciousness. What do you have for us today?
Okay, in 1994, a scientist named Dr. Masaru Emoto claimed that he had evidence that human consciousness can change the molecular structure of water.
Okay.
Yeah. He took water from different sources, right? Some in nature, some in big cities, and he put them all in bottles labeled where they were, came from. So then he took a few drops from each, froze it, and looked at the molecular structure. Okay. He then exposed each sample to either positive or negative stimuli.
All right.
So think of this bottle of water over here being repeatedly exposed to the word love.
All right.
And this one over here being repeatedly exposed to the word evil.
Right.
Okay. So he did that for some time. Then he took droplets from each sample again, froze them, and took a look at the molecular structure of each.
Right. And he found out something crazy.
Yeah. He took photographs. Thank you, Dr. Emoto. And we'll take a look at some on his site, masaruemoto.net. The molecular structure of the water that was exposed to positive stimuli is what I would say is beautiful. Looks almost like a snowflake. It's symmetrical. It's gorgeous. And the structure of the water exposed to negative stimuli is very asymmetrical. It's kind of just a mess. It has no beauty at all, right, in there.
This is not some guy in his garage posting this stuff on Reddit. This is like a real scientific study, right?
Absolutely. A valid study. He has published several books on this.
So the only thing is his controlled environment, it's just the way that the water was loved or hated. Is that right?
Yeah. The way the water was exposed to human consciousness, positive or negative.
That's crazy.
Yeah. I thought it was very fascinating.
Wow. So that would imply that there is a connection, at least that consciousness has some power over water.
Absolutely. And, he contends water has memory.
So he does too?
He does. He says that water has a memory and that it has the ability to kind of transfer consciousness or transfer thought.
What do you think about the report? Do you think there's anything to the idea that maybe water is behind time slips or has something to do with it?
Yeah, I do think there could be something to it. When I looked at a lot of the research on water and water memory and the properties of water, it made me think maybe there is something there, right? Now, skeptics will immediately say, well, that study isn't valid because, and then they'll list all these reasons. But I think just like with Dean Radin, when something is there, it's there. It's not a misinterpretation. So I do think that there is a possibility, especially around water, that there is a possibility that maybe it's parallel universes, maybe it slips in time. I'm not sure. But
you think that maybe there's something to it?
Maybe. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you again.
You're welcome.
Taking on this YouTube journey has been exciting, and I've learned so many things that I would not have learned. This report really made me think twice about water, I found it extremely fascinating that the brain is nearly 80% water. And it begs the question, are the cells in our brain using the water? Or is the water somehow conscious and manipulating the cells in our brain? You know, this report reminds me of the case of Malcolm Turner. He was a doctor who lived in England, and in 1986, he was suddenly and inexplicably transported to a banquet in ancient Rome. At first, he was just caught up in the wonder of it all, but rather quickly he realized that he was trapped. And to make matters worse, no one could see or hear him. He was like a ghost in the past. We did a whole report on him and another Timeslip story in the same video. If you're into Timeslips, you might want to check it out, but if you do, be warned. It's an earlier report of ours, and there are a couple of challenges. First, we had just purchased a brand new mic, and being the tech-savvy giants that we are, somehow we recorded the video only to the left speaker. So if you're using headphones, it can be rather annoying. And second, many of our subscribers have called out our voice actor for his poor English accent, and I cringe. But the story is fascinating, and if you'd still like to see it, knowing those challenges, it's here. Careful, my thumb, it hurts.
Oh, God. Cheers. Tink.
Cheers
To season 3.
Season 3.
Yay.
Yes, I just dropped my glass.